All right, so today we're diving into something that's pretty crucial for just about anyone, really, whether you're, leading a team or even just navigating your own day-to-day decision,
Hmm.
risk management.
Yeah.
Now, I know what you might be thinking, spreadsheets regulations,
Yeah.
maybe a bit of a snooze fest, but trust me on this one. Understanding this stuff can actually be a total game changer.
It really can.
We're going to kind of unpack some of these core concepts today, and then we'll see how they actually play out in the real world.
Absolutely. Being able to kind of see those potential pitfalls
Right.
before they become full-blown disasters, that's invaluable.
Yeah, nobody wants a disaster.
No.
So this deep dive, what we're hoping to do is equip you with some of the tools and insights that you need to actually do that.
Yeah, think of it as a crash course in risk management,
Mm.
but like tailored specifically for what you need.
Okay, perfect. So we've got a whole stack of sources here, articles, case studies, all kinds of things. And they're all focused on this idea of risk management for compliance professionals,
Hmm.
like you guys listening. So our mission here is to kind of help you cut through all the noise and pull out the golden nuggets that will actually make a difference in your work.
Yeah, I like that. Golden nuggets. I like that.
Right. That's
Okay.
good. It's like mining for information.
Exactly.
All right. So before we jump into the nitty-gritty of actually managing these risks, let's make sure we're all on the same page about what we're even talking about.
Yeah.
Because, we've got these three key terms that kind of pop up over and over again in our sources.
Yeah.
Risk, breach, and issue,
Mhm.
they get thrown around a lot, but what do they actually mean in a practical sense?
So think of it this way.
Okay.
Launching a new product, but you don't do any market research.
Oh, boy.
That's a risk
Okay.
because there's a potential for it to completely flop.
Big time. Yeah, you just kind of put it out there and hope for the best.
Yeah, you're crossing your fingers.
Exactly. So that's that leap of faith moment where you're like, okay, this could go really south. What about a breach?
Okay, so a breach is when that potential negative outcome actually happens.
Okay.
So the product launch fails, sales totally tank,
Yeah.
and now you're left scrambling to figure out what to do.
Oh, those are the headlines you don't want to see.
Exactly. And in a compliance context, it could be something like a data leak or a regulatory violation.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime those safeguards that you thought you had in place, they fail.
Ouch. And an issue. Where does that fit in?
Okay, imagine you discover a design flaw in that new product,
Okay.
but it hasn't actually hit the market yet.
Okay.
That's an issue. It's a problem that needs to be addressed like ASAP,
Uh-huh.
even if it hasn't caused a major crisis yet.
So it's like a ticking time bomb. It might not be going off right now,
Right.
but it could if you don't take care of it.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the difference between these three is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Risk, breach, and issue.
Right.
It lets you prioritize your efforts and your resources.
So we've got these potential problems lurking in the shadows. How do we, as savvy compliance pros, prevent them from turning into these full-blown disasters?
That is the magic of risk management.
Ooh, I like magic.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
It all starts with identification.
Okay, so we're talking about spotting those problems before they even have a chance to, rear their ugly heads.
Exactly. It's like having a crystal ball, but instead of relying on magic, you're using data insights and a whole lot of strategic thinking.
I like the sound of that better than a crystal ball, to be honest.
Yep.
So what are some of the tools that we have in our risk management arsenal?
Oh.
Because I know our sources mention this thing called regulatory horizon scanning.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is that?
Okay, imagine a new data privacy law is coming up on the horizon.
Oh.
Regulatory horizon scanning is basically like having a team of scouts out there monitoring the legal landscape, and they're giving you a heads up about any changes that could impact your organization.
So you're not just reacting to what's happening right now, but you're trying to anticipate what might happen in the future.
Exactly.
You're staying ahead of the curve, especially in a world where regulations are constantly changing.
It's like constantly shifting sands.
It really is, yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you've identified these potential risks. What's the next step?
Then we move on to risk assessment.
Okay.
This is where you figure out how likely a risk is to actually occur and how bad the impact would be if it did happen.
Okay.
So think of it like a triage system for your organization's potential problems.
So we're not treating all risks as equal.
Not at all. Some need way more attention than others.
Okay, so how do we figure out which ones deserve that extra attention?
We use tools like a risk matrix to help us prioritize.
Mm-hmm.
But even with those tools, there's always an element of human judgment involved.
What do you mean by that?
Well, two people might look at the same risk and assess it totally differently
Okay.
based on their experience, their knowledge of the organization, and even their own personal risk tolerance.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach. It's really about using these tools as a guide, but also trusting your gut and relying on your expertise.
Absolutely. And that's what makes risk management so interesting. It's both an art and a science.
I like that. So we've identified the risks. We've assessed their potential impact. Now what? What happens next?
Now comes the fun part,
Okay, I like fun.
mitigation.
Yeah.
This is where you get to put on your creative problem-solving hat
Uh-huh.
and come up with strategies to reduce the likelihood or the impact of those risks.
So we're talking about putting those preventative measures in place.
Exactly. Could be strengthening security protocols, implementing new training programs,
Okay.
refining internal controls, or even making strategic shifts in your whole business model.
Wow, so mitigation is all about action.
It is.
It's not just hoping for the best.
No, you got to be proactive.
Right, and so you set up those safeguards. Is that it? Are we done?
Not quite.
Okay.
The final piece of the puzzle is monitoring and reporting. So this means keeping a really close eye on your mitigation efforts to make sure they're actually working, and then making adjustments if you need to.
So it's not enough to just set it and forget it.
No, it's
You've got to be constantly evaluating and making tweaks along the way.
exactly. Risk management is dynamic. It's not static. The risk landscape is always changing, so you need to be adaptable.
So you got to be like on your toes, ready to move.
That's right.
This is all making perfect sense, but it also sounds like a lot to keep track of.
Yeah.
Are there any frameworks or tools that can help kind of make sense of all of this?
That is a great question and something we'll definitely be diving into more in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, perfect. I can't wait to unpack that. But before we move on, I want to touch on something that's really relevant to our listeners here, the role of the compliance professional in all of this.
Uh-huh.
Where do you fit into this risk management picture?
So you could say that compliance professionals are like the risk whisperers of an organization.
Ooh, I like that. I'm going to write that down. Risk whisperers. So you're the ones who can sense those potential problems brewing and then translate them into actionable insights for the rest of the team.
Yeah, we bridge the gap between those high-level strategic decisions and the day-to-day operations.
So you're not just enforcing the rules, you're actually shaping the organization's risk culture.
Absolutely. And that's a crucial part of creating a truly resilient and ethical organization.
Okay, so this is all fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
But let's be real.
Okay.
Things don't always go according to plan.
Right.
What are some of those common pitfalls
Oh, there are a few.
that organizations and compliance professionals specifically should be watching out for when it comes to risk management?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes I see is focusing just on past breaches
Okay.
without actually addressing the underlying causes.
So it's not enough to just react to problems. You've got to understand why they happen in the first place.
Exactly. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound without cleaning it first.
Ooh, that's a good analogy.
You might stop the bleeding temporarily, but the infection is still there.
Yeah, it's going to keep festering.
Exactly. You got to get to the root of the problem.
So true. Okay, so we've got to get to the root of the problem, not just treat the symptoms. What else?
Another common pitfall is treating all risks as equal.
So some risks deserve more attention than others.
Absolutely. It's like a triage system. You need to prioritize and allocate resources effectively.
Okay, so prioritization is key. What else should we be watching out for?
Another mistake is not engaging stakeholders enough in the process.
Okay.
Risk management shouldn't just be siloed within the compliance department.
Right.
You got to get buy-in from people across the organization.
So from the top down.
Yeah, from the C-suite to the frontline employees.
So it's about breaking down those silos and creating a culture of shared responsibility when it comes to risk.
Exactly. Everyone has a role to play.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Yeah.
But to really bring it home, let's dive into a case study from our source material.
Okay, let's do it.
So imagine you're working for a financial services company, and bam, suddenly you're hit with this massive fine because of a data breach.
Oh, no.
It turns out one of your vendors wasn't following the proper security protocols. What went wrong?
This is a classic example of how a seemingly small oversight can snowball into a huge problem.
Yeah, so let's break this down using our risk management framework. Where was the risk, the issue, and the breach in this scenario?
So the initial risk was lax third-party vendor oversight. Companies often focus on their own internal controls, but they don't always pay as much attention to their vendors.
So it's kind of like you said earlier, you assume that because you're doing everything right, that they are too.
Right, exactly.
And that can be a big mistake.
Definitely.
Okay, so the risk was not doing your homework on those you're doing business with. What about the issue? What was the issue that stemmed from that risk?
The issue was that the vendor wasn't following encryption policies.
Okay.
It might sound like a technicality, but it's a huge security lapse that can have big consequences.
And the breach, of course, is the exposure of customer data, which is, you know, the very thing these policies were supposed to prevent.
Exactly. And data breaches are serious business.
Yeah.
They can lead to financial losses, reputational damage, regulatory fines, even legal action from those affected customers.
So it's a major wake-up call for any organization that relies on third-party vendors, especially those handling sensitive information. What role does the compliance officer play in all of this? Like, how can they prevent or mitigate these kinds of situations?
Well, the compliance officer is often the one who connects the dots.
Mm-hmm.
They raise the alarm about potential vendor risks.
Okay.
They're responsible for making sure that due diligence processes are in place.
Uh-huh.
So thoroughly vetting the vendor before they're even allowed on board.
So they're not just checking boxes, they're really digging deep.
Exactly. Reviewing security protocols, data handling practices, and compliance with all the relevant regulations.
So really scrutinizing those vendors.
Yeah, making sure they're up to snuff.
Okay, and it doesn't stop there, right?
Nope. Ongoing monitoring is essential.
Okay.
Got to make sure the vendor is actually sticking to the standards
Hmm.
and that their security practices are keeping pace.
So it's a constant back and forth.
It is, yeah. Assessment, monitoring, adjustment.
Wow. This case study really paints a clear picture of why proactive risk management is so important.
Yeah, it really does.
But I think there's an even bigger lesson here too, right?
Absolutely.
Like it highlights just how interconnected risk is in today's world. Organizations are relying on these complex networks of partners, vendors, suppliers.
It's like a whole ecosystem.
Right. And a weakness in any part of that chain can compromise the whole system.
That's a great way to put it.
So it's not enough to just focus on your own internal house.
Nope.
You've got to make sure that your whole ecosystem is secure.
And that's where that proactive, collaborative approach to risk management becomes even more important.
That makes a lot of sense.
Oh,
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already.
we have.
Defining those key terms, exploring real-world examples, and even dissecting a pretty intense case study.
And we're just getting started.
I know, right? There's so much more to unpack.
So much.
So in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to delve into this whole world of risk management frameworks and how they can be applied in different contexts.
Can't wait. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a quick break.
See you soon.
Okay, so we're back. And before the break, we were talking about these frameworks
Yeah.
and how important they are to have the right tools. And I am itching to know more about these frameworks. You mentioned, is like, how do we actually put all this risk management theory into practice?
You're right. A framework is essential.
Okay.
It provides that structure and guidance.
Mm.
You need to navigate the complexities of risk management.
Mm.
Think of it like a blueprint
Okay.
for building a resilient organization.
I like that blueprint analogy. Okay, that makes sense. But I got to say,
Yeah.
looking at our sources, they mention a lot of different frameworks.
Hmm.
We've got COSO, ISO, HOSO.
Yeah.
The list goes on. It's kind of overwhelming, to be honest.
It's true. There's a lot out there.
Where do we even begin?
It can definitely feel like alphabet soup,
It really can.
but each framework kind of has its own strengths,
Okay.
and it's suited for different situations.
So no one size fits all.
Exactly.
Okay.
So let's start with COSO ERM,
Okay.
which stands for Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission Enterprise Risk Management Framework.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful,
Okay.
but it's a pretty widely recognized and comprehensive approach.
So it's a big deal in the risk management world.
It is, yeah.
What makes it so special?
Well, COSO ERM really emphasizes integrating risk management into the strategic decision-making process.
Oh, okay.
And it's at all levels of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just like a compliance checklist.
Right.
It's about weaving risk considerations into the fabric of how the company operates.
So it's like risk management becomes part of the company's DNA.
Exactly.
Yeah.
COSO helps organizations to align their risk appetite.
Okay.
So how much risk they're willing to take on
Mm-hmm.
with their strategic objectives.
So it's about taking calculated risks that actually support their goals.
That's it. It's finding that sweet spot between being overly cautious and taking on unnecessary risk.
I like that. So you don't want to be too risk averse, but you don't want to just throw caution to the wind either.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see the value here. Now, what about ISO 31000?
Okay.
Our sources mention that one too.
Yes, ISO 31000 that's developed by the International Organization for Standardization.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit more of a generalist framework.
Okay.
So it provides a set of principles and guidelines that can be applied across a wide range of organizations and industries.
So it's kind of more flexible than COSO.
You could say that it's designed to be adaptable and scalable.
Okay.
So organizations can tailor their approach to their specific needs.
So maybe like a smaller company with fewer resources might go for that ISO 31000, whereas a larger, more complex organization would maybe go for the more comprehensive COSO.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. It really depends on the situation. And of course, there's lots of other industry-specific frameworks out there.
Right, like in our world,
Mm-hmm.
we've got things like FCPA for anti-bribery,
Yes.
GDPR for data privacy.
Exactly. And those are just a couple of examples. The point is you need to choose the framework, or maybe even a combination of frameworks,
Right.
that best fits your industry,
Yeah.
your regulatory environment, and your organizational culture.
So it's really about picking the right tool for the job,
Exactly.
not just grabbing the shiniest one. Okay, that makes sense.
Oh, good.
But I have a feeling
Yeah.
that even with the perfect framework,
Mm-hmm.
there's one element that can really make or break your efforts.
That's right.
What is it?
It's the people.
The people.
It's all about the people.
So we need like a team of superheroes dedicated to risk management.
Well, a strong team is definitely helpful.
Okay.
But I'm talking about creating a culture of risk awareness
Okay.
throughout the entire organization.
So it's not just the compliance team's job.
Right.
Everybody needs to be on board.
Exactly. Everyone from the CEO to the frontline employees, they need to understand the importance of risk management and how it affects their work every single day.
That makes sense. But how do you actually do that? How do you cultivate that kind of culture? It sounds like a pretty tall order.
It takes time and effort, but it is achievable.
Okay.
And communication is key.
Okay.
Compliance professionals need to be able to communicate risk information really clearly and effectively.
So it's not just about sending out these mass emails with all this legal jargon that nobody understands.
You got to make it relevant
Yeah.
to their roles and responsibilities.
So it's about tailoring the message to the audience.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about working with other departments? Is that important too?
Absolutely. You've got to build relationships and collaborate with people from all across the organization.
So you're not just a compliance expert, you're also a master communicator, a relationship builder.
Pretty much.
You've got to be able to speak all these different languages. Finance, IT, operations, marketing.
Exactly. You got to be able to connect with everyone.
It sounds like a challenging but really rewarding job.
It is. You're not just enforcing rules. You're shaping the values and the behavior.
Yeah, it's about really creating that ethical culture.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about frameworks. We've talked about the human element. And now I'm curious about something else. Our sources mention some common pitfalls that organizations often fall into when it comes to risk management.
Yeah.
What are those landmines that we need to watch out for?
One of the biggest is complacency.
Okay.
It's easy to get comfortable and assume everything's fine, especially if you haven't had any major incidents lately.
So that if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality.
That's the one. But that can be super dangerous when it comes to risk management.
Why is that?
The risk landscape is always changing.
Right.
New threats are always popping up. Regulations are constantly evolving.
You can't just sit back and relax.
Exactly.
So what's the cure for complacency? How can organizations and compliance professionals stay on top of their game?
Continuous monitoring and improvement are key.
Okay.
Regularly review your risk assessments, your policies and procedures, and make sure they're still relevant and they're still effective.
So it's not just about setting it and forgetting it.
No, you have to constantly be evaluating and adjusting.
Okay, so risk management is a garden. You've got to tend to it.
I like that analogy. That's a good one.
It's got to be dynamic. It's got to be alive.
That's right.
Okay, so complacency, enemy number one.
Yes.
What other pitfalls should we be aware of?
Another one is failing to involve stakeholders throughout the process.
Okay.
You know, risk management shouldn't just be happening in a silo within the compliance department.
So like we were talking about earlier, you've got to get input from everybody.
Exactly. It's important to get input from different teams and individuals across the whole organization.
So it's about breaking down those silos, creating that culture of shared responsibility.
That's it. Everyone in the organization plays a role in managing risk, from the CEO to the frontline employees.
Okay, and how can compliance professionals help foster that culture?
Communication is key. They have to be able to communicate risk information really clearly and effectively to different audiences. And they also need to be good at building those relationships and collaborating with people from all different departments.
So you're not just an expert on rules and regulations.
Right.
You're also a great communicator, a relationship builder, and a change agent.
You got it. And that's what makes being a compliance professional so challenging, but also so rewarding.
I can see that. So we've talked about frameworks.
Yes.
We've talked about the human element. And we've explored some common pitfalls. Now, to really make this all come to life,
Okay.
let's dive into another case study.
Let's go.
So this time we're looking at a financial services firm.
Okay.
And they get hit with a regulatory fine because of a data breach. Turns out one of their vendors, the one handling all that sensitive customer information, wasn't following the proper encryption policies.
I've heard this one before.
It's a common problem.
It is.
And it illustrates how these seemingly minor oversights can lead to major problems.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with third-party vendors who have access to all that sensitive data.
So let's break this one down using our risk management framework.
Okay.
Where was the risk, the issue, and the breach in this scenario?
Well, the initial risk was lax third-party vendor oversight.
Okay.
You know, companies, they focus so much on their internal controls, but they don't always apply the same level of scrutiny to their vendors.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, it's easy to assume that because you're doing everything right, that they are too.
It is, and that can be a big mistake.
Okay, so the risk is not doing your homework on the companies that you're working with.
Right.
What was the issue that came from that risk?
The issue was the vendor failing to adhere to encryption policies. It might seem like a small thing,
Yeah.
but it's a fundamental security lapse that can have huge consequences.
And the breach, of course, is the exposure of that customer data.
Exactly. And that's what those encryption policies were supposed to prevent.
And that can lead to a whole host of problems.
It can, yeah.
Financial losses, reputational damage, regulatory fines, legal action from customers.
It's a compliance nightmare.
It really is. So this is a big wake-up call for any organization that relies on those third-party vendors.
Yeah.
What can we as compliance professionals do to prevent these types of situations from happening, or at least mitigate the damage?
We play a critical role in identifying and managing those vendor risks.
Okay.
It all starts with due diligence. We have to vet potential vendors really thoroughly before we bring them on board.
Okay.
And that means digging into their security practices, their data handling procedures, making sure they're aligned with industry standards and regulations.
So you're not just taking their word for it?
No way.
Yeah.
You're verifying their claims, making sure they have the policies and procedures in place.
You're checking under the hood.
Exactly.
Okay, and it doesn't stop there.
No, it doesn't.
So once a vendor is on board, what happens then?
Ongoing monitoring is crucial.
Okay.
You got to stay vigilant, keep an eye on their performance, and make sure they're sticking to those standards.
So it's a lot of work.
It is, but it's better to be safe than sorry.
That's true. What are some red flags that might signal that a vendor is maybe cutting corners or not taking security as seriously as they should be?
That's a great question.
I thought so.
So some things to watch out for. A lack of transparency.
Okay.
If they're reluctant to share security audit reports, if they have a history of data breaches or security incidents, or even just a general lack of awareness about data privacy and security best practices.
So it's about trusting your gut. If something feels off, it probably is.
Exactly. If a vendor is giving you the runaround or seems hesitant to answer your questions about security, that's a big red flag.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about due diligence and ongoing monitoring.
Yeah.
But what happens if, despite our best efforts, a breach does occur?
Uh-oh.
What's the compliance officer's role in damage control at that point?
You become the quarterback of the incident response team.
Okay.
You work with legal IT and other departments to investigate what happened, assess the impact, and then come up with a plan to contain the damage and prevent it from happening again.
So it's about having that plan in place.
Yes.
Knowing who to call, what steps to take.
Exactly. And communication is key too.
Right.
You have to be transparent with stakeholders, both internally and externally.
So being upfront and honest,
Yes.
showing them that you're taking this situation seriously.
Exactly, because building trust is so important, especially during a crisis.
This case study has really shown how interconnected risk is in today's business world. You can't operate in a silo.
You can't.
We need to break down those barriers, collaborate across departments, and foster that culture of shared responsibility.
Couldn't agree more. We're all in this together.
We are.
And we need everyone's expertise and insights to create a truly resilient and ethical organization.
Okay, so we've talked about frameworks.
Yeah.
We've talked about that human element. We've looked at real-world case studies.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has. And hopefully our listeners have a much better understanding of the challenges and opportunities that come with navigating this world of risk.
And how it's constantly evolving.
Constantly evolving. So to wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay.
As compliance professionals, we're often seen as the rule enforcers, guardians of compliance.
Right.
But I think our role is much bigger than that.
I agree.
We're strategic advisors, we're problem solvers, and we're champions of ethical and responsible business practices.
Well said.
So as you go out into the world,
Yeah.
remember that risk management isn't just about avoiding those negative outcomes. It's about creating a better, more resilient, and more ethical future for everyone.
That's a great way to put it. We have the power to shape not just our organizations, but the whole business landscape.
So true. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of risk management. Until next time.
See you then.
Still curious, stay informed, and stay ahead of the game. Okay, so we left off talking about this financial services firm.
Right.
And they got hit with a big regulatory fine because of a data breach.
Yeah.
And it turned out that one of their vendors, the one handling all that sensitive customer information, they weren't following those encryption policies.
Yeah, this is why vendor risk management is so important.
It's a big deal.
It is.
It's like that saying a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Exactly.
You can have all the internal controls in the world, but if one of your vendors messes up, it can bring the whole house down.
Absolutely. And that's why you've got to think about risk management holistically.
Right.
It's not just about what's happening inside your own organization. It's about understanding those risks across your entire ecosystem.
Okay, so let's break this down using our risk management framework.
Okay.
Where do we see the risk, the issue, and the breach in this scenario?
So the risk, like we talked about before, is insufficient vendor oversight.
Okay.
Companies often focus so much on their own internal controls
Right.
that they don't always pay enough attention to their vendors.
Yeah, it's easy to just assume that they're doing everything right.
It is.
Yeah.
Because you are.
But that can be a dangerous assumption.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So in this case, what was the issue?
The vendor wasn't following proper encryption policies. Might seem like a small technical detail,
Right.
but it's a major red flag when it comes to security.
Okay. And that lapse in security led to the breach,
Exactly.
which is that unauthorized access or disclosure of sensitive data.
Right. And data breaches can be really costly,
Oh, yeah.
both financially
Mm-hmm.
and in terms of reputational damage.
Yeah. They can really erode customer trust.
Absolutely.
Lead to lawsuits, all sorts of bad stuff. And it can even impact a company's stock price.
It's a mess. So what can we as compliance professionals do to prevent these situations from happening, or at least mitigate the damage if they do happen?
Well, we play a really critical role in identifying and managing vendor risks.
Okay.
And it all starts with due diligence. We have to really vet potential vendors thoroughly before we even consider bringing them on board.
Okay.
So that means digging into their security practices, their data handling procedures, and making sure they're aligned with industry standards and regulations.
So you're not just trusting what they tell you.
No, you're verifying those claims and making sure they've actually got the policies and procedures in place.
You're doing your homework.
Exactly.
Okay. And it doesn't stop there, right?
Right. Ongoing monitoring is crucial.
Okay. So you bring the vendor on board, and then what?
You got to keep an eye on them. Make sure they're actually following through on what they said they would do.
So you're constantly checking in.
Yeah, making sure they're sticking to the standards.
So it's a lot of work, but it's worth it.
It is. It's better to be proactive than reactive.
I agree. What are some red flags that we should be looking for?
Okay, so some things that might signal a vendor isn't taking security seriously. A lack of transparency.
Okay.
If they're not willing to share their security audit reports. Or if they have a history of data breaches or security incidents.
That's not a good sign.
No, it's not.
Or even just like a general lack of awareness about data privacy and security best practices.
That can be a red flag too.
So it sounds like it's important to trust your gut.
If
That something feels off, it probably is.
Right. If a vendor's giving you the runaround or doesn't want to answer your questions about security, that's a big red flag.
Okay, so we've talked about due diligence and ongoing monitoring, but what happens if a breach actually does occur? What's the compliance officer's role in damage control?
You become the point person for incident response.
Okay.
So you work with legal IT and other teams to investigate what happened. Figure out how bad it is.
Right.
And then come up with a plan to contain the damage and make sure it doesn't happen again.
So it's all about having a plan in place.
It is.
Knowing who to call, what steps to take.
And communication is key.
Right.
You've got to be transparent with everybody involved.
So being upfront and honest with everyone.
Exactly. Showing them that you're taking the situation seriously.
And that helps build trust.
It does. Especially during a crisis.
This case study really highlights how important proactive risk management is.
It does.
And how interconnected everything is in today's business world. You can't just work in a silo.
Nope. We've got to break down those barriers and work together.
And collaborate across departments.
Exactly.
And create that culture of shared responsibility.
That's the key.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
We've explored the basics of risk management. We've defined those key terms.
Right.
We've analyzed some real-world case studies.
And we've seen how important that human element is.
Absolutely. It's not just about checking boxes.
It's not.
It's about creating a culture of awareness and responsibility.
Well said.
So, as a compliance professional, remember that you have a vital role to play.
We do?
In shaping not just your organization, but the entire business landscape.
It's a big responsibility.
It is, but it's also an exciting opportunity.
It is.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of risk management.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay ahead of the game.